Hello and welcome. My name is Dubs Weinblatt. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I'm the Associate Director of Education and Training for Metro New York for Keshet. I'm thrilled to be back as the co-host of Season 2 of Joy and Resilience, Jewish LGBTQ leaders on what sustains us. This season, we are proud to partner with Bechol Lashon, an organization whose mission is to strengthen Jewish identity by raising awareness about the ethnic, racial, and cultural diversity of Jewish identity and experience. I'm excited to introduce to you my co-host for the season, Anthony Russell.
Hi, my name is Anthony Russell. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm a performer, composer, and writer of music mostly in Yiddish, an essayist in a number of Jewish publications, a cultural advocate and activist, and last but not least, very pleased to be joining Dubs Weinblatt as co-host for Season 2 of Joy and Resilience. As LGBTQ Jewish people, and specifically as Jews of color, oftentimes we need to create our own ways of persevering through tough moments. Surviving and thriving in this world has pushed us to create our own store of unique wisdom about resilience, joy, and community. Each episode, Dubs and I will invite a different LGBTQ Jew of color to join us in a thoughtful conversation about what sustains us and keeps us hopeful, in a conversation where we can only speak from our own personal, lived experiences.
Souksavat Souks Soukhaseum, originally from Laos, began his service to the Free Synagogue of Flushing in 2014. Coming from a background in finance and hospitality, Souks serves as an historian, archivist, and as the director of community affairs, keeping his synagogue relevant within his community and beyond. Welcome, Souks.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yes, it's so nice to see you and to have you here.
Yeah, right. Finally.
Yes, exactly.
So, Souks, your life has taken you to a number of places, both geographically, culturally, and spiritually, beginning in Southeast Asia onto the San Francisco Bay Area, where I'm sort of originally from, and now in Queens, where you are the Director of Community Affairs for the 100-year-old Free Synagogue of Flushing. Having seen so much of the world and from so many different vantage points, as a refugee from Laos, and then as an immigrant to the United States, and now as a kind of bridge between Jewish and Asian communities in Queens, I'm curious, what kind of experiences connect you specifically to joy?
I love to travel, obviously, and I love to experience the Laotian diaspora, but also the Jewish diaspora. So the journeys that I take really encompasses both the Asian aspect of me and the Jewish aspect of me. And that's really what brings me joy, but also joy is having both vaccinations and getting back to working with the community. And working with the community is the Jewish and the Asian community. In the Asian community, I draw upon my experiences growing up as a refugee and coming to America. My parents raised 6 kids in the United States. So a lot of the services that we had access to were through faith-based organizations. So today, a lot of the things that I do with the community reflect my background and coming to the United States.
So it's interesting that communal organizations gave to you, and in a sense, you're giving back to communal organization.
Yeah, paying it forward in a sense, tikkun olam.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm curious what if you have a favorite kind of touch point or way that you interact with the different communities that you're part of.
Touch points. I think I love explaining to the Asian community what it means to be an Asian Jew, because sometimes when people approach me, they think about Flushing through pop culture. I don't know if you guys are familiar with The Nanny, right?
Oh yeah.
Well, given that
it's Flushing, and you get that whole like Bubby Zadie concept, and it's like no, it's changed. Our community is 60% immigrants, and so it's the explanation to the Asian community is very interesting because you get all kinds of questions like, what tribe do you belong to? Is Frankenstein Jewish? Well, that question came from a kid. So I host a lot of the public schools at the synagogue, so they can ask me questions about Judaism, and we talk about the history. And a teacher had told the student that if you wanted to identify a Jew, you can tell by their last name, if it has gold, silver, steen, so on and so forth. And the child asked me, is Frankenstein Jewish? And I was like, I didn't know how to answer that, but I was like, yeah, if you want to be.
Wow. Frankenstein.
Yeah, Frankenstein.
Yeah, no, I know I was Frankenstein, but just thinking of all the different ways that, anyways, that's a very silly question to have to field.
It's interesting, but it also shows me the level of understanding the community has about the Jewish population here, or the Jewish community.
So, Souks, you had mentioned to me in a previous conversation that you were fascinated by the Asian element of Judaism, and so I'm wondering if you would expand on that for us and tell us what that means to you. So,
my partner is a Hazan, a cantor, and so, I get the picture of the Jewish side, but when I come into the picture and I want to explore that, there are really not very many resources out there. So I think that's where my fascination comes in. And organizations like Keshet or Behol Lashon really do provide that for me. Or through travels, going to Singapore, going to Laos, going to Korea, and exploring how the Asian community has accepted the Jewish people in that country, or vice versa. But I think it's also, for me, it's like, how do I create a tradition that I can relate to and not just have it be Jewish, because I'm both. Some people sometimes question, are you Jewish or are you Asian? Well, why can't I be both? And sometimes being in a community so distant from other Jewish communities, especially in the Flushing community, I look to resources and I look to other communities for inspiration on how to kind of create that environment for myself.
Yeah. So how do you? Like, what are some of the traditions that you've come up with?
I think food. Food is very much a part of me. Like, coming from Southeast Asia, there's a lot of flavors that the Jewish palate doesn't really appreciate. So, but also during Hanukkah, like I have fried tofu, I have rice cakes that my grandma sends me, that are fried in oil. I'm not a big potato person, so I have to kind of like shuffle around that.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about really creating traditions and, and also showcasing myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's really important because when somebody who didn't necessarily grow up in American, like Jewish culture, becomes a part of American Jewish culture, oftentimes it feels like there's a kind of pressure to leave those parts of yourself behind in order to fully, sort of embody being a part of the culture, and figuring out what the continuities are between yourself and your history and your culture and this other culture that you've taken on. It's work, but it's wonderful work because you feel like you really are inhabiting, yourself as a Jew in a way that feels right and authentic to you.
And I make a killer matzo ball soup with lemongrass, ginger fish sauce, soy sauce.
That sounds amazing.
If there's like a Taste-O-Vision plugin for Zoom, I would like to experience that immediately. That sounds amazing.
I usually make it for the Seder. So, come on over.
Okay, Seder 2022 at Souks House. All right.
Yay.
So I'm going to turn to a very serious sort of subject, which I'm hoping you'll be able to address. recent instances of violence against Asian citizens in the United States only seem to be rising lately when one ignores a history of well over 100 years of both state-sanctioned and casual discrimination leveled against Asians in this country. The fact that in the face of all of this, the Asian community has managed to organize, protest, and create solidarity with other ethnic communities really speaks to an effective kind of resilience. I'm curious if you could speak to this and the ways in which you find resilience in yourself.
I find resilience by supporting the community. So every Tuesday, like today, I deliver food to the homebound elderly, and a majority of the homebound elderly are elderly, basically, and they are the ones at most risk when they come out to grocery shop, right? We see a lot of all this violence and hate, and they're usually directed towards the elderly Asian population that really can't defend themselves. Because if someone attacked me, I'd be like, oh no, we're going at it. But yeah, so resilience is passing on some of my resilience to them. But also resilience is acknowledging the long history of hate that's existed in the United States against Asian Americans. So when we talk about immigration to the United States, there are two sides to it, right? You have the European immigration and you have the Asian immigration. And I think there's a lack of education about the Asian immigration experience. Sometimes the Asian experience is sidelined, especially when it comes to policies created by the government. When we talk about immigrants coming to the United States, we see it from a European perspective. People getting off the ship, being processed through Ellis Island. And this is reinforced when you see commercials on TV, on Ancestry.com or genealogy or any genealogical sites. You never see the Asian experience. And yeah, it's very different because I grew up in the Bay Area and I know more about the Asian experience, especially not the battles, but the trials and tribulations of getting into the United States. A lot of Asians were processed through Angel Island, and they were subjected to literacy tests, or they were held on Angel Island for upwards of 2 years, versus what we see in New York or the East Coast, where people are just processed through Ellis Island without questions or without any scrutiny. And I think it makes me think differently about the two worlds that I live in. Having that Asian experience and then seeing it from the Caucasian aspect of it.
Yes, there's been a way in which, the way in which America has chosen to sort of describe, the American dream or the American experience, or America as, to use a Yiddish phrase, the golden Medina, right? A land of gold, is very coherent because it's been expressed as something that's very coherent to kind of what it is to be American. And other ways of immigration have not been expressed in that way, even though they're all stories of American immigration.
But I think we blend our stories together. And I think the Asian community has kind of been a part of more of the white community. I mean, I'm a Jew of color, but what does that mean? I sometimes don't feel like I'm a Jew of color because a lot of the times I've been grouped into the white experience of the journey. And like I said, sometimes our journey, the Asian journey, hasn't really been highlighted.
Right, it's its own specific story, not to be like conflated with other journeys.
Yeah.
So the season of Joy and Resilience is specifically about experiences of queer Jews of color. And I'm wondering if there's been a particular moment or experience you've had where you were able to inhabit the different aspects of who you are all at once. And what did that particular moment or experience look like?
So as a Jew, you inherit a lot of traditions, but you don't inherit some of the shtick that comes with being raised in a Jewish family. So some of the stuff I don't get, the jokes, and it can be very challenging. So, as you know, I'm the historian, so people pop in all the time for tours. And there was one time when two women stopped by. Obviously, normally people make appointments when they want a tour of the synagogue, and these people just popped in. So I had to ask some questions. I was like, well, what are you guys doing here? Because I could be a victim if I give them a tour. So I take them in and I give them the tour. It was like 30 minutes. Then the questioning starts. They're questioning me about my Jewish identity. I mean, it was almost close to like me meeting my mother-in-law with all the questions that she asked. So yeah, so for me, when you come into my sanctuary, I feel comfortable in all my identities. But since I don't understand some of the nuances with growing up in a Jewish family, I don't get some of the questions they ask. And I take it on a defense level, like, oh, you're questioning my Judaism, and why does it matter to you? You're here for a tour. So, the questioning goes on for about an hour, and I'm like, okay, when someone says, let me walk you out to the door, it means, girl, you got to go. So, I walk the two ladies out, and they're still asking me questions, and I get to the door, and the lady turns around and says, I have a daughter who might want a tour. And I was like, you never mentioned anything about your daughter before. And so at that moment, I got it. She's waiting for me to answer, and I look at her and I look at the other lady, and the other lady's looking down, and I'm like, okay, is someone going to say something to these people? So I say, I'm a fegala. And so the lady turns red, and the other lady looks up and says, oh, I have a son who might want a tour. And I'm like, these ladies were asking all these questions, and here I am thinking they're challenging me, trying to hook me up with their kids. So, I mean, I feel comfortable in my space, but when people come into my space, my sanctuary, and start questioning me, it could be very challenging. And like I said, I didn't grow up in a traditional Jewish family, so I don't understand some of the stereotypes that are presented, like the aggressive mother looking to hook people up.
Well, wow. I think it says in the Talmud that maybe this is just a Baba Maisa, it's an old wives' tale, but that hooking people up so they eventually get married. It's supposed to be like a major mitzvah, right? So maybe when they saw you, they saw an opportunity for a potential mitzvah. I don't know.
But the gay aspect, I'm like, oh, this lady totally did not get that I was gay. And, most people do get that when they meet me.
Well, I have to say that I didn't know where that story was going. I was on the edge of my seat. And also, growing up, I was raised Jewish in a Jewish family, but I wasn't getting that from the story, right? I wasn't thinking, oh, this is where this is going. And so I wonder if I think maybe it's context. And this isn't to negate your experience of like not like like catching on to some of the nuances of certain inside jokes or whatever. But I think I can understand when you are in your own space and people are coming into your space and they're strangers and then they start questioning you. I don't know that my first response either would be, oh, they're trying to hook me up. I'm going to be like, oh, I'm on the, like how you said, like, I'm on the defense. Like you're in my space. You're questioning my identities and me. And so I guess I say all of that is to like maybe give yourself some grace on like not catching on to certain nuances. Cause I certainly didn't catch on. I was on the defense with you. I was like, where's this going?
Yeah. Well, I mean, my experience, your experience, it's all different, but
yeah, of course.
But I'm also standing here and I'm like, this is a nice man. He knows the history of the synagogue. Quite a catch.
Well, it was just funny. The other lady looks up and like, oh, I have a son whom I wanted to her. I'm like,
I feel like that's like a sketch because it's like you are built like a sketch comedy, like a routine of like
a Larry David type thing.
Yeah, of just like it's this like really dramatized, I don't know the right word, moment, and then it's really like, no, I just want to hook you up. Oh, not this kid? How about this kid?
I have another one for you.
Right, exactly.
I had a concert where I'd spent an hour singing in Yiddish, and after it was over, a woman came up to me and says, "Are you single?" And I'm like, "No." And she's like, "Too bad. I have a niece, and she needs a strong Jewish man in her life." And I was like, "I am not the one."
Maybe you didn't come off as gay, but I thought I came off as pretty much gay.
I also thought I was very much coming off as gay. But you never really know, do you?
Yeah, exactly. Well, if you're trying to hustle.
So, Souks, in your work as a liaison between various communities, I would imagine that the quality of hope must play a really important part, especially in consideration of trying to come out from underneath this pandemic as a community. As a person who works to some degree in giving hope to other people in your community, I'd like to know what gives you hope.
What gives me hope is that in the 2nd century of our history, the Jewish people are present in serving the Asian community. There's visibility, right? I mean, you guys are really bringing in about stories about Jews of color. And we don't always hear about that. And I think that's really what gives me hope. But hope is also having the conversation continue on the hate, the hate issue, but also the issue of acceptance, right? Of anybody, all the flavors of Judaism.
You really want to believe that we've come to a time in history where just like Jews are able to really acknowledge and honor and appreciate the diversity of the community, because it's always been a diverse community. And it feels like in the past few years that really has become a reality in a way that it not necessarily has been, in the past.
I think like I said, ensuring that we remain relevant, and relevancy is acknowledging that there is diversity.
Exactly. So beautifully put. I really want to thank you for having such a great conversation with us.
It's been fun.
Very much so.
I really do want to come back around at some point and get the recipe for that matzo ball soup, because now that I know that that exists, I'm going to be thinking about it for a long time and not just during Passover. So I want to thank you for that as well.
Grass and fish sauce.
Oh, man. Thank you so much, Souks. This has been a really great conversation.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's been fun.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Joy and Resilience. To learn more about Keshet, a national organization that works for the full equality of all LGBTQ Jews and their families in Jewish life, you can visit them at www.keshetonline.org.
And to learn more about Bechol Lashon, an organization that strengthens Jewish identity by raising awareness about the ethnic, racial, and cultural diversity of Jewish identity and experience, please visit them at globaljews.org.